living our lives. Midwife Crisis.
The Midwife Crisis podcast will touch on sensitive topics regarding the human body, sexuality, pregnancy, and all aspects of women's health care, and may not be suitable for all listeners. Hi, I'm Piyar.
And I'm Kate, and this is season 2 of the Midwife Crisis podcast, because it's not just you. Today we're joined by a very special guest, our friend and fellow midwife, Shoshana. Shoshana is a well-known and beloved midwife in our community who I'm lucky enough to work with and learn from. She was known to me well before I ever met her because I would do OB care for some of her patients, and they'd come to me and be like, listen, you're great, but, Shoshana is my person, and I cannot stay with you because I have to return to Shoshana.
Whoa, that's a hard act you're following there. Welcome, Shoshana. So happy to have you here. We do go back a little bit. I was aware of Shoshana and her full scope practice as a new grad in the community. And I remember thinking, what a cool name, before even finding out what a cool, calm, collected, and strongly skilled midwife she was. But we have just as important a claim to fame, and that is that our daughters were friends and went to school together. Now, they are long out of high school and art school, but I always thought that was pretty cool. In today's episode, we're hoping to demystify breast cancer. So those of you who have it or have known someone who is a thriver or are curious, we want you to feel that it's not just you. And so, Shoshana, a couple of things first we ask our guests to do is to share your pronouns and tell us a little bit about yourself and your midwifery journey before we get into the meat and potatoes.
Okay, it's so nice to be here. I'm really glad you guys invited me, and I'm especially happy to have a chance to sit across the table with PR, who I don't get to see nearly enough, and next to Kate, who I do get to see, but of course it's never enough. My midwifery journey, I always like to say, started in a very unlikely place, which was Harvard University, which is where I went for undergraduate education. And I
told you she was smart.
It wasn't that big a deal back then, but, I am pretty smart, but it wasn't as big a deal then as it is now. But while I was there, I was studying history of science, and I ended up focusing on history of medicine, and I concentrated on American history of medicine, and I learned about midwives. Wow. And I was interested in doing some kind of healthcare, but I didn't want to go to medical school for a whole bunch of reasons, including the fact that when you're at Harvard and you meet pre-medical school students there, you really don't want to spend the next 12 years with them. I'm sorry if I've offended anybody, but it's just a fact. But when I learned about midwives, I was really excited. And so I decided that's what I wanted to do. Now, of course, I had an education in history. And so I had no idea what it was going to be like being a nurse. And at that time, that meant, bedpans, bed changing, all this stuff that you learn in nursing school. But it turned out to be fabulous. So that's really when I learned about public health nurses and midwives in 19th century America, that's where I got my start.
Like Mary Breckinridge.
Yep. And the women who, in New York City would come into, the homes of new immigrants and deliver babies on the table with some newspaper underneath and bring care to the people who needed it without a lot of hoops to jump through.
Right.
That's fascinating.
I didn't know that about you. That's so cool.
I didn't know it either. So it is cool.
Yeah, that was my origin story.
I love that. And then where did you do your midwifery training?
Then I came to Yale. I went to the 3-year program. So for people like myself who had degrees that were not in medical or nursing fields. It was a kind of a leap of faith. Again, I had done a little bit of volunteer work at a local women's health clinic, but I really had no idea what I was getting into. And the program was, everything I needed. It was just a great experience and a great immersion. And of course, meeting wonderful fellow students and professors.
That is awesome. And I just want everyone to know that means that I am in the midst of 2 women who both went to 2 Ivy League institutions. I'm state school, girl. So if anyone's feeling a little intimidated, don't worry. You can still do it without being Ivy League. But that's so amazing. You guys
it's
are
not just you.
Hard eyes. Exactly.
Right. You certainly do not need to go to Ivy League schools to deliver babies.
To go to Ivy League schools, for sure you don't. And I also have a degree in Latin American history. So it
There you
just
go.
goes to show if the drive, persistence, and the desire is there, it can be done.
You got to answer the call.
Yeah, especially if you have a call.
So while Shoshana, as we know, is a bona fide wealth of knowledge and expertise, I've come to think of her in my practice, which is now all GYN, as sort of the breast chest health expert. I'll go grab her and, ask for her input with different patients. Because again, as we've said, she's not only an awesome provider, wife, mom, she's a yogi, she bakes, friend, all those things. She is also a 2-time breast cancer survivor. And according to breastcancer.org, breast cancer became the most common cancer globally as of 2021. It's most commonly diagnosed cancer among American women. And about 1 in 8 U.S. women, so 13%, will develop invasive breast cancer over the course of their lifetime.
And we'll get a little bit later into the podcast about statistics and as they relate to our special populations. If you wouldn't mind, Shoshana, she. Yes.
Shoshana, she.
Okay, Shoshana, would you tell us a little bit about your journey? Now we know your journey with midwifery, but your journey with breast cancer, like when and how were you diagnosed each time? Because I think that that's really important for listeners who, those who know someone or who themselves are survivors, but also people who are wondering.
Mm-hmm. So my first diagnosis was when I was 46. And even though I kind of knew that I was going to get breast cancer eventually, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later, I felt really mad that it happened in my 40s because I thought that's just the prognosis isn't as good. Plus, it's just a drag. I had been having biopsies and extra mammograms for years. Starting when I was 26, I had various benign lumps and things excised and things biopsied. I always used to joke that I think I've had every single breast procedure that there is other than a tram flap or one of the flap reconstructions, but all the diagnostic tests. And that was a way for me to be an even better clinician for my patients because I could then say to them, oh, you're going to need a needle biopsy. And this is exactly what that means.
For sure.
So, fast forward to years of biopsies and abnormal mammograms, and then I felt something, and I thought, this doesn't feel right in my own breast. And I had it looked at. I can't remember now the sequence of events because that was a while ago, but it was biopsied, and it was cancer, and it was an invasive cancer surrounded by a lot of DCIS, the in situ cancer. So that began the process that anybody who's had cancer knows, which is the time of information gathering, question answering and asking, and making decisions. And the doctor who had been my surgeon and had done a lot of my biopsies, was one of the people I was talking to. But some of it you just kind of have to go through on your own. Luckily, I work with, are we allowed to say people's names?
I mean, but
Emily, my boss, Emily Fine, who basically, if you're on her team, if you're in her family or on her team, she will take you as far as you need to go. So she arranged for me to she said, I really think you should have genetic testing before you make a decision about what to do with your breasts. Because I was faced with, mastectomy, lumpectomy, what to do.
Yep, and we'll talk a little. We're going to break that down a little bit.
Before you go further, were you doing regular self-exams?
I was. Yeah, I was pretty good about that.
Good. Okay. I was just curious.
Although, it is weird when you find a lump and you're like, but I just checked this and does it just pop up like that?
Right.
I don't think so. But whatever it was, that moment.
And that's why I always tell patients, because patients are always like, well, what am I looking for?
Right.
And I'm like, it's not that you're looking for something. It's that you're knowing what your breasts feel like.
When something is different.
Changes.
Being very familiar with them.
Right.
And I've had that with patients, with their partners
Yes.
who have revealed something
Yes.
because they're used in their intimate processes. And so then...
I believe those are called fun bags.
I don't think that's what they're called.
I don't. The clinical term.
In our house, we call them tetas. But anyways, they would say, my partner felt something.
Yeah, no, that happens. I hear that a lot.
They notice, and so I came in. Can you please check this out?
I've been amazed sometimes at the things that partners can find, but
Yeah.
they must be attentive. You know?
and they
It's
know
very
the
cool.
body.
Yeah.
You know, if you have a decent relationship, they're paying attention to your body.
So I had been
also.
checking. I had been getting mammograms yearly. It was probably almost a year till I was due. It was like a year since my last mammogram when I found this lump. But
so it's coming up on the time.
But the thing that freaked me out was that the DCIS area was not visible on the mammogram, and it was apparently quite large. And
Do you
so
mind
that had probably
explaining a little bit for our listeners DCIS, just really quickly?
DCIS is they call it either stage 0 cancer or non-invasive cancer. It's an area of abnormal cells. They are cancer. They're not really precancerous. They are classified as cancer, but they haven't escaped the little area that they're in, so they're not likely to go to lymph nodes. I personally don't make a big distinction between it and invasive cancer because I've now seen so many people with so many variations of how things go. Like, oh, I only had DCIS, but the next thing you know, I had something else in the other breast. And so it's cancer. It should be taken seriously. And you have options like you do with invasive cancer. The good news is it's very rare to find anything in the lymph nodes or more distant disease with it. So that's a good thing. So I had a little bit of both.
That was your first round.
That was my first round.
Okay.
So the genetic testing was negative, which was great because which I had because my mother and her mother also had breast cancer.
Oh, interesting.
And an aunt on my father's side. So I had it in my family big time. But the genetics were negative. But the person who did the genetic screening, Ellen Matloff, who is also, an angel for me, said, listen, given what I know, what you've told me about all of this, the biopsies, the this, the that, you have like a 30% chance at least of getting another breast cancer. And while this one is pretty low grade and is probably going to be cured, I can't guarantee that will be your future. Which is a hard thing to say to somebody, but I was really, really glad she did.
Well, that's daunting to hear, too.
It is daunting to hear, but once you hear it, it's like, okay, I'm 46, I have 2 young kids. I'd like to be around for a while.
Sure.
I think that probably removing the breast tissue is going to give me the best shot at that because I've been through having biopsies once a year, once every 6 months. I've been going through this for literally for a decade or 2 decades. I don't really want to do that anymore. I want to stop worrying.
And you weren't planning on breastfeeding.
I wasn't going to be breastfeeding any more children, and I'm married to a man who's totally accepting of who I am, no matter what. It's totally different. People have different issues, of course, and I've talked to lots of women who have different feelings about their bodies and preserving their breasts. But for me, it felt like I've already spent so much time and energy on these things. I wouldn't call them, I'm not fun bags. I mean, I might call them pain in the neck bags or something.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I don't really call them fun bags either, but I wanted to say that. We're more of a boob family. We just call them boobs.
So when I went back to my surgeon and said, I think I'm going to have a bilateral mastectomy, she was like, oh, I'm so glad you decided to do that. She wasn't going to suggest it because I guess, and that was
kind of aggressive, no?
It was, for what
not for your situation, but just in terms of suggesting it right off
I think
the bat.
also at that point, I guess it was like 2000 something, 4 or something. Surgeons had been accused of being over-aggressive and recommending mastectomy. And it doesn't really, we can talk about this also later. It doesn't decrease your risk of death. It doesn't really change your outcome necessarily. Unless you're like one of these people with positive genes and you're going to do a lot of surveillance. But for the particular cancer you have, if they just take it out and you get treated, that cancer is not going to come back any less often if you have the breast removed.
Gotcha.
But it meant that I didn't have the other breast to worry about.
Right.
Or other parts of that breast, which had already been giving me trouble. So that was really telling to have the doctor react that way. But it confirmed my decision. And it felt pretty drastic, but once I made the decision, I didn't really look back at all. And that's partly me. I compartmentalize. I could say, this is what I need to do to and, like you said, I'm not going to breastfeed. I'm not going to be a model. I'm not going to whatever.
A breast model.
A breast model. Yeah, that's not in the cards for me.
So how about the second time?
The second time really knocked me on my butt because that was 2017. So 4 years ago now. I've had no boobs for years. I had implants and reconstruction, and I found a little something under my other armpit. And at first I was like, oh, it's just a little skin thing. And I had everybody who was in the medical field who I either knew or saw as a patient feel it. So my primary care,
I love that.
my GYN. The only person who thought it was suspicious was my skin person, who was an APRN. And she's like, I don't think that's a cyst. I think you probably should have that checked out. Being me, I waited a little bit. And then I tried to get into Yale where I'd had my care. And of course, any of you who've dealt with Yale know that once you have a breast cancer diagnosis, they get you in, they're wonderful, they take really good care of you. Until that point, it's like going in a maze that has no entry and no exit. You're just going around and talking to different people. So I was like, oh, you have to have imaging. So I had imaging. I guess I had an MRI and an ultrasound. Nothing showed up.
What?
They didn't want anything to do with me at Yale. So I said, I'm going to go see a private surgeon and just get this thing out because it's driving me nuts.
Right.
And so I went to Kay Zuckerman, who I always like to give a shout out to because she
Yay,
is
Kay.
super awesome, my hero, totally, 100%. She ultrasounded it. She excised it. She also didn't think very much of it, but, she was like, I think it's good to get rid of it. And a week later, she called me and I'm sitting in a parking lot and she said, you have cancer. There's cancer in that breast and it's a totally different cancer than what you had in your other breast. This was a lobular. That was a ductal.
Did you tell her? Wait, this is someone else's assignment. I already had.
I
this
know. Well,
assignment.
I said a very bad word, which I will not say in your podcast.
We're explicit.
And then, okay, because I felt bad because I didn't know
do say
Kay.
bad words.
I didn't know Kay very well, and I thought she could be a very proper person, but I was like, fuck, that is not okay. And I really went into a tailspin.
Yeah.
I bet.
Because it was like everything you think you've done to take care of this problem, it's not enough.
Right.
And I don't mean to scare people. I always joke. If people ask me my story, I usually start by saying, I'm everybody's worst nightmare. This doesn't happen very often. And I think I'm going to be okay. But it's a crappy story.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to have your breasts removed and then get breast cancer again.
Right.
That's like just not cool.
That's a fascinating story, and people need to know that.
So
And
it
you're
means-
not the only person that's happened to.
Oh,
And
I know
so I
that.
hope someone who
additionally,
knows someone is listening.
There's so many patients that I see or that we know of that are non-binary or trans that get their breasts removed
Right.
and they have chest reconstruction, and they think, well, and I've got this added benefit of I'm not going to get breast cancer, but you still can.
Right. I mean, their risks are reduced,
Right.
but they're not zero.
Yes, and I have heard them say that. I've heard patients.
Well,
of mine.
sure. I mean, I really thought I was done. I was like, well, something else is going to get me. I can be very dark and I know I'm going to die, but I was like, it's not going to be breast cancer. And then it turned out maybe it is.
So you had talked about that you had surgery, obviously, the first go around.
Yep.
What other treatments did you have? So for those who are not familiar, there's chemotherapy, there's biotherapy, there's hormone therapy, there's radiation. So there's all different, and with surgical, there's not just mastectomy, there's lumpectomy. So there's all different types of sort of treatment options. So we'd love to hear.
So I had mastectomy, and they had done a sentinel node biopsy. They had only taken a couple of nodes from that underarm, and they were both negative. So that was great. And because the tumor was quite small, although it was, when you added up all the little tumors, it was big, and the DCIS itself was big, but they decided that I did not need to have radiation or chemo.
That's great.
And I went on tamoxifen for 5 years. So, so I had surgery and tamoxifen. I felt great about dodging the bullet of radiation and chemo
Chemotherapy,
particularly.
yes.
Yeah. And I still stand by that decision because it wouldn't have helped this other thing because this is a totally other side.
Right.
So
What with your reconstruction, what kind of went into your decision? I've seen some beautiful photographs of women who have had reconstruction, who have not had reconstruction, still gorgeous art forms, basically.
Yeah.
And so, but it's startling for folks who aren't.
it's very startling.
It's not it's our line of work, but it's very startling. Like I remember sharing the pictures with my family, and they were like, "Why are you showing that to us?"
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have some patients who've not had any reconstruction, and I'm even a little startled at times. And so it's interesting. I think the surgeon at the time, when I was going over my options, she said, it's just kind of sad when you see a woman's chest with nothing there. I mean, you don't even have nipples when they do the mastectomy.
Right.
They take everything off. I felt like I wanted to feel whole in a bathing suit and
Sure.
doing yoga.
The
basic shape. I didn't think I would ever be the kind of person who would like to use, what are they called?
prosthesis.
Prosthesis, thank
My
you.
Nana,
Yes.
my
My
Nana
aunt
had
used to
one.
have them.
So
Yep.
did my grandmother.
Yeah.
Yep, I remember you'd throw that heavy thing in the bra and then try to get the
Yeah.
other arm in.
And I was just imagining it being like heavy and sweaty and moving
Yeah.
around and being embarrassing. So I was like, I just want to look like myself in clothes and in a bathing suit.
Yeah.
So I did a simple saline implants. I also didn't want it, like I know enough of medicine. I knew that if you did like a tram flap, they were going to cut your belly muscles.
Sure.
At that point, I was a pretty serious yoga practitioner and I'd been spending my whole life trying to get strong
Strengthening that
abdominal
core.
muscles. And I
Yeah.
was like, I don't want to have them cut those. And anyway, and it's a different kind of recovery. And I wanted to get back to my life. I had 2 kids. Ariel was 12 and my son was maybe 16 or something. So that I just didn't feel like I had the time to, and I didn't want to do that. So I felt good about that as well.
I have to say, I try not to comment on people's bodies, but one time at work, Shoshana was in a like zip up thing, and I was like, "Whoa, you look so like busty in this," and I didn't know that she had ever had breast cancer. And someone else we work with was like, "Yeah, it's those implants
those
or whatever,"
perky
and
implants.
I was like, "Really?" Because they're very natural looking. So I do have to say, they can look really natural.
They can. I mean, I've seen some women who've had beautiful, flap reconstructions that are just incredible. And you
Yeah.
think, if I was 26, maybe I would have opted for that because it would be very important how I looked naked and all this. Because they never look 100% like your original breasts. They just don't.
And so the flap reconstruction, for people who are wondering, I mean, you can look at it, and this is not specific, but basically they use your own tissue and like muscle, sort of pull it abdominally and kind of pop it up. So first they do expanders, which is basically they put something under the chest. Did you have to have that too?
I did have to have expanders.
To sort of like stretch the skin in the area where the either implant's going to go or the flap. And then with the flap, I think is it muscle? I can't remember.
I think it's probably a combination.
Yeah, but they sort of kind of pull everything up. And so you do get this really tight, like sort of constant pull in your core. And I remember caring for some of those patients when I was a new nurse. And
the nursing
really
care,
painful.
I mean, the care afterwards, the post-surgical care can be very delicate.
Yeah.
Because you're reattaching blood vessels and I think maybe not nerves, but blood vessels and the skin healing. It's all you have to be really careful. And a lot of women have to have revisions done. It wasn't for me, but it is really, you can get a really amazing result from those.
Now, you don't have to answer anything you're not comfortable with, but I'm just curious. Do you have any areola? Like, do you have a tattoo or anything or nothing?
Oh, I have little nipples that the plastic surgeon created partly because my daughter said to me, this is kind of intense. You've got a 12-year-old, she's just growing her boobs.
Yeah.
And you're 46 and you're losing your boobs.
Yeah.
And she said, Mom, a breast without a nipple is like a face without a nose.
Oh.
And I was like, you're kind of right, So I did that. I didn't do any of the tattooing because I mainly just wanted the idea of the nipple to be there.
Oh.
Yeah, it's
That's an
so
artist's
sweet.
way of looking at things.
very
It's
visual.
a visual artist, yeah. And there are some women who will have that site tattooed, not for nipples, but just as art for that.
I have
for
seen
the
some
side
beautiful
that's missing.
tattoos.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I told Shoshana. I was like, if that ever happens to me, I'm going to get like some cool like armor.
Yeah,
like,
no, it's impressive.
some like Viking thing tattooed on me. And I'm never wearing a shirt again.
Yeah.
Okay,
You
here
know,
we go.
If I have to lose my boobs, never wearing a shirt again. Just quote me on that.
Wow.
I'm going to try to remember that. That's good.
It's so interesting how people, how you just, your image, your self-image, how that plays into a part of your decision making. Because I definitely would get some implants that don't have to be slung over my shoulder when I get dressed.
Exactly. The rest of me is just falling down, but these implants, very perky.
They'll be till the very end, I imagine.
And another thing is when I first got the diagnosis the first time, my first thought was, I am not losing my breasts. I am not going there. But it was a process, and thinking about it and having the genetic testing and thinking about what it would mean to go through this again someday. I really changed, and I felt totally comfortable with my decision. But that was my very first reaction, was like, oh no, we're not
you
ready
had to
for
go
that.
through it, and you used your breasts to nourish your babies, and they're, like you said, they're part of your silhouette, and sometimes you have fond memories, your partner, whatever.
Yeah, sure. No, it's an amputation.
It is an amputation.
And so I think that that's really important, that people understand that it's a part of who we are, not even from a sexual perspective, just of your body.
Like if you
your
wanted
body
to take
entirety.
Yeah, don't take my pinky finger either.
Right.
You know?
Well, make sure you don't owe certain people any money. And then you won't get your finger chopped off.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness, that's
But it is an amputation, and I'm glad you said that, because one of the things I'm struck by with my patients is women are really strong, and we put up with a lot.
Yes.
And women do come to this, when you have a cancer diagnosis, a lot of women come to this place of like, this is what I'm going to do. I know it's kind of sad, but I'm not going to go there. I just have to do it.
Right.
And then they don't really look back.
Right.
Because why would you, or how could you, and how do you go forward if you're also looking back?
Right.
But I'm very impressed, because even women who you think are going to be really, it's like, oh gosh, she's going to just fall apart. They get themselves back together, and they do what they got to do.
Yeah, sure. You want to survive, the desire to survive, and to do it in a manner that's going to be loving and helpful, hopefully, for your family members as well. It's not just your decision by yourself. It is, but, you want, like you said, you want to be around for your children. So that plays a part. If you just say, no, I just want to hold on to the girls until I go. I don't care if I go when my daughter's 14. So who would say,
no one
would say that? So, but I do know that, if people think that, that's aggressive, why not lumpectomy and that kind of thing? And there are many, many factors that play a part in starting with your diagnosis, but also just your future.
Right.
And what kind of future you would like to see yourself having.
Yeah.
So I think that's, that bears mentioning. So anyways, do you have anything else you want to share? We're going to get into some, and we want you to contribute to this part too. We're going to get into some stats about our special populations, but any
I think we're good. Keep it moving, girlfriend.
Well, I will say one thing. When I had my second diagnosis, I did have to have radiation.
Oh.
So that is interesting.
The plot
thickens. And I don't remember now what the rationale was. Maybe just that it came back like that. It was so weird, and it was in a weird place. And when she went in there were a bunch of little tiny seeds of cancer. So she took it all out. She took most of the lymph nodes out, and in the process, kind of ruptured my implants. So I had to have new implants put in.
Wow.
Yeah. Although they were probably due anyway.
Reached their limit. They had reached their limit, maybe.
Yeah, and radiation is not fun, it turns out.
No.
Not fun.
No, I have patients who have had symptoms in different parts of their bodies where the radiation did not even occur, and they're just really uncomfortable.
Yeah, and then even the nicest radiation oncologist will tell you, I don't think that's from the radiation. I would get like nausea.
Yeah.
Now, to me, it makes sense that if you're radiating up here in the armpit and chest area, that some of those rays don't know that there's a boundary, and they're going to get to your esophagus or your stomach. But I was told, no, I won't know. The way we're doing it, it's very directed, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, when I stopped radiation, I stopped having the nausea. And it wasn't like anxiety nausea.
Right.
It was just a physical thing. And it's really tiring. When people talk about being tired, it's
after
like
radiation.
a kind of tired like you have after you have a baby or surgery. Fatigue, 7:30 at night, your eyes are closing, you have to go to bed.
I mean, sometimes I think of it as like if you're ever in the sun all day, because it's heat, right? And that's exhausting.
It's exhausting.
Yeah, and that's a happy kind of tired, but it's still a tired. Yeah.
Right, and I kind of thought of it as your cells, your entire body is now working to do something with the cells that are being destroyed by the radiation. They have to be processed,
right?
And it just takes a tremendous amount of physical energy to do that, and so you have to rest a lot.
Yeah, no, and I imagine, and pay attention. So I've had patients come as GYN patients and say, my radiologist said, this is not anything that has to do with them. And I'm thinking, and so whenever else did you get these uncomfortable sores or whatever it is on your genitalia? Yeah. And so it's very
We do a good job of telling people, but especially women, that their symptoms are not what they perceive them to be, And it's frustrating because how do we know specifically? We don't.
Right.
We're looking at this overall grouping and retrospective studies and, associations, but you can't, know every micro, piece of each person to know what they're going to feel or not. And so I always say when people ask me, I mean, not about radiation, but about birth control or different things where they're like, is it possible that I feel X, Y, and Z? I'm like, it is always possible, for sure.
Because we listen.
That's true. That's true.
We listen.
Yeah.
And that we're taught, trained, and sort of intrinsically
And we're curious because that's why
listen.
we went into this, right? We had a curiosity and a desire to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And so we hear them, and then we actually over time can make correlations that people are not because there's not listening.
Yeah. And we know correlation is not causation, but still it's like we're able to say, there's a possibility. And even if it's just psychosomatic and you're just like, maybe you are just doing that, let's remove it and see.
But it's helpful for people to know that they aren't the only ones, as our tagline says. And so even like you said, it's not causation, it's not research, but it helps when I can say, I have 2 other patients who have the same complaints after having that particular issue. So you're not, neurotic, and you may be neurotic about something else, but this is legit.
Okay, so I think we should take a really quick break.
Okay,
and
that sounds good. And then we can get into the other stuff, which we hope that Shoshana will jump right in also, since she is a provider.
She'll jump in. She's the best. She'll dive right
I'm
in.
a jumper.
All right, we'll be right back.
Hello, my name is Josh Levinston from the Between Two Rocks podcast here at Baobab Tree Studios, and I want to share all of the wonderful people I know in New Haven with you. From restaurant owners to painters, photographers to small business owners, political activists and city officials, we discuss issues you care about and then make fun of them. Join us at the Between Two Rocks podcast wherever you get podcasts today.
Okay, and we are back with the midwife. Midwife.
Were you drinking on the break?
little drink break. No, with the Midwife Crisis podcast, we are in season 2, and we have a really cool discussion today with our special guest Shoshana talking about breast cancer.
And as usual, we'd like to address the impact in our unique communities. When we speak to midwifery care, we always try and talk about that in our podcast, and so we want to do it today with regard to breast cancer. When I was doing some of the research, I saw this really cool site called the Sisters Network, which is a national breast cancer survivor organization founded by Karen Jackson. And they have been working actively to investigate why fewer Black women are screened and why there are differences in the treatment and why more are dying than the white population. So apparently Black women have a lower incidence rate, but are more likely to die than their counterparts. And 41%, according to their research, are more likely to die than white women. And Black women are also more likely to develop the disease at a younger age and have more aggressive forms like triple negative. Do you want to explain triple negative, or I can? It's up.
I can do it. I'm nodding because I know that to be a fact, and I find it disturbing and interesting because triple negative breast cancer is, to my mind, it's almost like a different entity. So when they talk about positive and negative, they're talking about receptors on the cells. And the receptors that they look at are estrogen, progesterone, and HER2. And if you're positive for receptors, you have a better prognosis because they can treat you after your surgery with medication that will counter those effects. But if you're negative, there are fewer treatment options. They tend to be much more aggressive cancers, and you're much more likely to die from them. So I would really love to know why some women get those cancers. I don't think we do know that yet, but they're devastating.
Yeah, the research apparently is still, they're undergoing that. But apparently 3 is the magic number for disparities that exist in the Black community, because we say, they're 3 times more likely to have maternal child, morbidity and mortality. And they're 3 times more likely to develop the triple negative type of cancer. And so speaking of 3s in a nutshell, so Black women are younger at diagnosis. They have more aggressive types of cancer and higher mortality rates because those cancers are tough to treat.
Right.
They're not, as Shoshana said, they don't respond to some of the focal treatments that we would usually provide. And the rate for Latinx population is lower than non-Hispanic whites. And I say non-Hispanic whites because, Hispanic population is not monolithic. And so we come in all shades and sort of ethnic backgrounds. But there's a 20% lower incidence, which is very interesting. And it's what I also found was interesting in my research was that there's a higher incidence in Latinx groups residing in the U.S. than of their country of origin.
Oh.
And so you would think if, for example, a Mexican woman's living here, but she comes from a country where that's not then that would be the same for her. And it isn't understood totally, just like the triple negative isn't quite understood totally with the Black population, but it may be related to them having social issues here, motherhood, breastfeeding, weight, and weight gain once you come to this country, because
such a different diet.
We likes to eat here, and not always what's good for us.
Right.
Sometimes residing in food deserts, eating a lot of fast food, all kinds of things like that can really have an effect. And so the thought by the researchers is that as they become affected by lifestyle influences, that, their living conditions, their socioeconomics, the access to care, that kind of thing, that the rates are going to, the prediction is the rates will rise in that population too. And it's not just protective to be of that population, but also where you are, how you are living is going to have some influence. Apparently, Asians and Pacific Islanders have the lowest rate of breast cancer.
Yep.
And so that's just a wonderful thing. But we don't, there needs to be more work done on that. I wanted to just mention real quick, because I know I'll forget. That's, I said to someone the other day, my mind isn't as long as my finger. And she said, what does that mean? It's an expression. But anyways, there is a group in this area called Sisters Journey. And it is a group for women of color who have been diagnosed with breast cancer. And I have 2 aunts who were members and many friends who are members. And it's an unfortunate sorority to kind of be in. They produce a beautiful calendar every year to raise funds and help support women of color in this struggle, like if they need help, whatever kind of way, financially or just emotionally or whatever. And so Sisters Journey, I encourage you, if you have any extra funds, to make a donation to speak to that. That's off topic, but I know
Very cool.
Because I don't have that long mind, I would forget.
We like that. We like a shout out.
Go ahead and talk to us a little bit about the genetics piece.
Yeah, so we had already touched on this a little bit, but we know that a woman's risk of breast cancer nearly doubles if she has a first-degree relative, so a mother, sister, or daughter who's been diagnosed with breast cancer. That being said, less than 15% of women who get breast cancer have a family member diagnosed with it. So Shoshana had already spoken to this. If she had a family history of breast cancer, which it sounds like she did, I don't know. We haven't really talked about BRCA1, BRCA2, that kind of thing, and what that can mean for patients. I don't know if you're comfortable speaking to that at all, Shoshana.
I can talk about that. So, some families, as you say, there are a lot of families where there's breast cancer. Some of them have a lot of cancers, breast and ovarian, or multiple members of the family who've had breast cancer. And so they are often offered genetic screening to find out if they carry a genetic mutation. It used to be just 2 mutations, the BRCA1 and BRCA2. Now I think it's blossomed to like 34 different genetic mutations that they can look at.
Yeah,
no doubt.
Yeah, and in fact, I'll put in a plug for people who've been tested for BRCA, or and have a family history. Sometimes it's worth going in again and getting another round of genetic counseling to see if you would benefit from being checked for some of the newer mutations that they've found. And that's something that happened with me so I had testing the first time, but I also was retested with way more tests the second time.
Kind of, yeah.
Still negative, which is kind of weird for someone who had it twice. But it is important to know that. But it's also important what you said, which is that less than 15% of women who have breast cancer have a family history. It's a very hard set of rules to keep in mind because people say, well, I can't have breast cancer because nobody in my family gets that.
Right.
And I'm like, I know that.
Right.
But it could still happen.
Well, or it's the opposite where people are obsessed with it. It becomes a part of their family's journey. Like in my family, it's just my grandmother who had breast cancer, but she was diagnosed when my mom was pregnant with me. So everyone associated my birth with her cancer. And it was like, it's this journey that's sort of sauce being a huge part of my whole life.
Yeah.
I don't know, that we're obsessed with, and it's kind of it's just her,
Yeah. It also is the mutations the BRCA mutations in particular are more common in some ethnic groups, particularly Ashkenazi Jews. I don't know what the numbers are, but much higher rates of BRCA positivity and breast cancer in general. I mean, I sometimes think when I'm sitting in synagogue and I look around at the other Jewish women, it feels like 80% of us have had breast cancer. And in fact, when I had my second diagnosis, I was talking to someone and she was like, oh, well, my mother had it 3 times.
Oh my
And she was like 90 years old. She'd survived it all.
Wow.
So that made me feel really good.
Yeah.
It was a helpful thing to
Comes
hear.
from good stock.
But anyway, so the genetics, I don't know if you wanted more detail than that. The most important thing is to go to somebody who can explain to you what
Right.
they're doing, what the testing will and will not tell you, what it's going to cost you if it is going to cost you something. And that's often an issue that keeps people from going for screening.
Yep.
Yeah.
And what the benefits of having the information will be.
Right, because once you have that information, you have it. So you may find out something you didn't want to know.
Exactly.
You can't unsee it.
Exactly.
Right.
And
Go ahead.
I've now been in the situation where I've had a number of very young patients who are BRCA positive. So talking them through, the next steps for themselves, they're like 26 years old and getting mammograms and MRIs, and when do you have your babies, and when do you think about having mastectomies prophylactically, and possibly having your ovaries removed. And there are a lot of decisions that you have to make. And you're a kid, basically. You're still just starting out in your life, trying to make decisions of how to build your life, not how to keep yourself from dying from cancer.
Yeah.
I had a faculty member from Yale who was positive. She tested BRCA positive. So then the rest of the family went for testing, and they were all positive as well. And so they started scheduling. And they had members who had died.
Yes. Yeah.
So that was kind of what started the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then they did the testing, and they started to schedule their surgeries because she was going to have her ovaries removed and she was going to have a mastectomy. And they just said, we just want it all cleared. And they were kind of, it was like a family project because everybody can't be down at the same time.
Right, because they have to be there to help each
You
other.
want to support one another. But I was just fascinated by how she just revealed that information. I wasn't in school at the time. This was long after. She was one of my mentors and advisors when I was in school. And how she just sort of matter-of-factly passed it along, which I thought, this is what we need to do. We need to be transparent. We need to talk to people and not sort of, put your coat up and whisper, behind everyone's back or whatever. We need this information, and we need to be open about speaking to it, and not. And I think sometimes I think what prevents us is seeing our tetas, our boobs, our breasts as sexual equipment. And so first, before we see it as all the other purposes that we have them for. And so, I think we need to normalize that it's like an arm, it's like a foot.
Yeah.
It's a part of our bodies. Sure, we can do a lot of things. People do intimate things with feet too. But
So true.
you don't have that kind of attitude about it. And so I would love to see a paradigm shift with regard to that.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And of course, that has so many implications as well. We've talked about before, but like with nursing and, feeding children and all of that, the hypersexualization of this like mound of fat.
Right. That you
On your
can't
body.
expose it to feed your child.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, that's another episode.
Totally. So I usually like to just, again, I'm not the authority on this, just like, PR is not the authority on all things Black or Latinx.
Exactly.
But we like to sort of represent our crews a little bit. So I always like to touch on LGBTQIA plus community and population. And, it was interesting when I was doing my research, there's not a lot of specific research as per usual in that general population. But I did find one study that looked at specifically lesbian and bisexual women and trans men. And they do have some sort of predisposing or possible factors in their communities that may be increasing their risk. So we've been talking a lot about the genetic piece, but there's other risks as well. And so things like an increased likelihood of being overweight, being nulliparous, which is never having a pregnancy or a child, non-lactating, as well as an increased incidence of potentially smoking, alcohol use, things like that. Additionally, this population, and we've talked about this before in almost every sort of conversation we have, is sometimes hesitant to seek care because you can feel like a freak and an anomaly and not comfortable. If you're a trans man going into a GYN office surrounded by women or pregnant women or whatever, you may feel uncomfortable in that scenario. And so you may not be going for your visits, and then you may not be getting your mammograms. And, that sort of sets you up as well to potentially miss those sort of early diagnoses. And so I guess I was just wondering, Shoshana, do you counsel your patients on prevention strategies? What do you typically say? And how do you sort of teach people about that self-breast exam or like that familiarity with your breast?
I usually take the opportunity of while I'm doing a breast exam to talk about it with the patient. So I'll say, when's the last time you checked your breasts? And sometimes they'll say never, it freaks me out. Or they say, oh, I do it all the time. And then I'll talk about, I say exactly what you said, which is I am not, because everyone to a woman says, I don't think I would notice if there was something there.
Right.
And I say, it's not about that. It's about knowing what your body feels like, what's happening there. And I guarantee that if something pops up that you've never felt before, it's going to ring a bell. And I sometimes will share my own personal experience, not always, but I'll say, I know exactly what you think because I always had lumpy breasts, blah, blah, blah. But I felt
you knew
things.
when there was something that was different.
And I've seen enough women for whom that is absolutely true. So that's basically what I do. And I talk about, the timing. It's best to do it if you're still menstruating, to do it after your period. And if you ever find something and you're not sure, do not hesitate to come in and let us take a look, because you're not supposed to be the expert. You don't have to be the expert.
Right.
We'll help you sort it out and figure out if it's something that we need to take care of or not, or whether we can reassure you and say, oh, yeah, that's just a little fluid-filled cyst and you don't have to worry about it.
I think that's huge, because I think some people don't know, like, if I feel something, what am I supposed to do?
Right. Well, they mostly tell me they're going to just panic. And they're like, if I find something, I'm just not going to know what to do. I'm just going to panic.
Well, here's something interesting I found, sort of a cultural difference. So by and large, the Black population uses a washcloth in the shower tub to wash with. And I find that other people don't necessarily, other cultures or whatever, don't necessarily, they use their hands.
Yeah.
And so I remember I would tell my patients, especially those of color, okay, so do you use a washcloth? Yes. Can you put your washcloth down and wash your breasts with your hands?
Oh, gosh, that is something
That's a
I've
good point.
never even thought
so
of.
that you can know your breasts and be familiar with your breasts and feel that. And I know that usually they're comfortable with that because that's not one of their private spaces and that they want to scrub clean, but they're willing to do that. And I said, that's how you're going to really become familiar. So if you're just showering and washing with your soapy hands, your breast every day, barehanded, then you'll become very familiar with them. And I didn't have to say that necessarily to the other population. Like I said, we're not monolithic. So my children were raised washing with a washcloth, and their dad does not, because where he comes from, they don't do that. And now, of the 5 of us, I am the only one who still uses a washcloth. They're like, nobody has time for that, and they just go ahead and take care of things the way they want to take care of things.
I worked with a woman of color who had her kids use, I think, 3 different washcloths.
Oh, we use a different one for our face.
Well, that makes
than for our
sense, yeah.
other parts of our body.
And then I think there was one for sort of the general body.
Oh, gotcha.
It's like, well, no wonder your kids are rebelling. That's an awful lot to think about when you're in the shower.
It's a lot of laundry too.
I remember
because we changed
every day.
daily. Right.
I remember going to someone's house once, like for like a sleepover or something, and they gave me a washcloth, and I was like,
what do I do with
what the
this?
fuck do I do with this?
Yeah, when we go on vacation,
I didn't use a washcloth.
if we go on vacation, hotels generally will give them to you, but you know, Airbnbs or whatever will not. And so I just know I'm packing enough for everybody. Wow. Yeah, and my son was my best friend. Who was Puerto Rican. She and I have a few best friends, but one of them, he went over her house to sleep over with her son. And so she's giving them a bath, and I walk in when she's giving them a bath, and she's got her bare hand and she's just going at it with both kids. And I'm thinking, that is peculiar. You don't use anything, no loofah, no washcloth, no anything. And she said, no, how do you even know you're getting it clean? And I'm thinking, how do you know you're not? And it's just one of those differences
oh my gosh,
that people don't think about.
Yep.
But that is a suggestion for those patients
That's a great
of
idea.
yours.
It is, yeah.
I want to bring it back to one more thing, which I would probably be in big trouble with Tracy if I didn't mention.
Oh, it's coming up.
Okay, I'll keep my mouth shut then.
It's next.
So where were we? We were talking about
LGBT.
You were talking about self-exams. Mm-hmm.
And prevention stuff, like, I don't know if you mentioned that. I mean, I will tell people sometimes if they're really worried, like I have some, you have some patients who are hyper aware and they're always like, okay, is it time for you to do my breast exam? Like they want you to get your hands on their breasts because they just feel like you have this magical locating sense in your hands to know if they have
radar.
cancer. Right. So for a lot of those patients, I try to look at the things they're doing right and sort of remind them. Like I'll be like, the good news is you've had a couple babies, you've, nursed those babies, you are not a smoker, you're a healthy weight, all these things help decrease your risk. And I try to sort of like,
encourage the positive.
That. Yeah. I'm not like going to someone who's overweight and being like, well, you're overweight, so you're totally going to get breast cancer because it's not, a thing. But I don't know. I feel like that's what I do. Anyone else have any little tips for providers as far as prevention?
Well, I think that's just important in general, providing health care for women is to try to get the positive going first, give like 5 positives for your 1 negative kind of thing. So I think that's probably
because they know
common.
that being overweight is not healthy, and if alcohol is an issue, we talk about that, and alcohol is implicated in lots of cancers, and certainly in breast cancer. And now apparently there's no healthy amount of alcohol we're supposed to be drinking, according to the studies.
And so that's when we totally disregard
exactly.
studies. When we say that's when we say that's all hocus pocus.
Yeah.
That's when we look at those like Smuckers things where they talk about the 100-year-old woman and they're like, and she drinks a glass of wine every day, and you're like, well, she's 100.
Yes, that's right. Those celebrations they do on the news. Sure. We don't talk a lot, typically discuss cis men much on this podcast, only in the course of being partners and that kind of thing. But they're not immune, of course, we all know, to breast cancer. Although less likely to develop breast cancer than cis women, the American Cancer Society still estimates that in 2021, roughly 2,700, there were like that many new cases of invasive breast cancer in men. Or in 2021, they're estimating that will be that many will be diagnosed, and that their estimates are based on previous years, of course, and experience. And 530 will die from it. Now, how do you predict dying and all of that? Well, there are ways. Take it from a former underwriter, that's what was our job, to predict when you were going to go based on something. Did you meet any men in your journey?
The only man I know is the husband of one of our colleagues, and I think about him. I don't like if he wasn't married to a midwife. Would he have gotten care as quickly as he did? Because my guess is that most cis men, if they feel something in that part of their body, they're going to assume it's nothing,
right?
Because it doesn't hurt usually,
right?
It doesn't have any scary symptoms, and my guess would be that they delay. There's a big delay in diagnosis.
Sure.
Although this guy, I think between himself being somewhat connected to the healthcare field and his wife saying, oh, you got to get that biopsied ASAP. But no, I haven't met other men. I'm sure they're out there. I just don't know them.
Do we have any ideas, just like a nanosecond brainstorm, that what can we do to ensure men are aware? Like,
There's, it would be awesome if there was a campaign on television or in print media, just reminding men to check their breasts.
Yeah.
Because they don't think of, I know it's weird because they don't think of themselves as having breast tissue. So that's the first thing. Everybody has breast tissue.
right.
You can get
your
breast
chest.
cancer. Yeah, you check your balls, check your boobs.
Yeah.
Don't tell anybody if you don't want,
check
unless you
your
have
chest.
something there.
Right.
And I'm particularly concerned about trans men because I think what happens when you change your gender, you kind of you're removing yourself from your original anatomy. I would think, and there's a distancing, and so I can't quite picture those guys doing a lot of breast checks because they put that behind
And
them.
especially if they have top surgery. And
Yes,
they
right.
think that
Especially once they have top
that
surgery.
the risk is kind of gone. That outwent that with the boobs. So
So I guess that's something to remember to talk to those clients about. Just don't forget. I mean, you should check your whole body for lumps and bumps, I guess.
Absolutely.
But there are some areas that are more prone.
Yeah. I mean, as a mama of boys, I definitely try to tell them, like, we talk a lot about privacy. We talk a lot about our bodies and different parts that, are sort of more private parts and things like that. But we really try to encourage them to, if they see or feel something or notice something on their bodies, to let us know. Because there have been times where, they have like a tick on them for whoever knows. So just telling them at a young age, like, you can't ignore your body. You can't just like get in the shower for 4 seconds. You have to like really wash yourself and take a look. If they're not comfortable, one of my kids is very comfortable with me being all up in his stuff. He loves me to be there when he's naked. The other one is very private.
Yes.
So, encouraging them, boys and girls, of course, but I mean, we're talking to the, male population with breast cancer, encouraging them to let people know from a young age, like, it's okay if there's something going on with your body, you should check it out, because I think sometimes that, like, there might be this masculine thing that's sort of like, well, I'm fine, I'm just going to like ignore it.
right.
I don't know any men like that. Cough, cough, my husband.
They definitely are on the delay side of the spectrum when it comes to seeking care and getting physicals and just doing, normal stuff, which is why even with prostate cancer, the rate could probably be lower if they would go in and go get it done. They're kind of squeamish about all of that, which we have to teach normalcy. Just like you're trying to do with your boys.
I think one of the reasons is that women have to come to the
GYN
providers
we're
because
drawn in for many reasons, starting with menstruation.
We're held hostage, but having pap smears and if you want your birth control pill refilled or whatever. Men don't have that equivalent thing, so once their mommy is no longer making appointments for them, then it's got to come from them. And why would you if you feel fine?
Sure.
So we need to work on that.
One thing we didn't talk about, and I'm just thinking about now, as we're just talking about breast cancer, is you had mentioned nodes. And when you say nodes, you mean lymph nodes. Now, some people don't need any lymph nodes removed or just a few. Some people need many, many, many. And that can impact our body. So I don't know. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
So usually what they'll do if you have cancer, they almost always do a sentinel node biopsy, meaning they put dye in the breast that goes to the lymph node that's likely to be the first defense. And they'll take one or two of those nodes out. They'll do what they call a I'm losing the word for it.
Okay.
When they send it to the lab right away, and then they get an answer.
Pathology.
Yeah, but it's a cold.
Oh, but it's like a frozen.
They do a frozen section, so they'll do a quick and dirty look and send a message back to the surgeon. This is benign or it's got cancer. If it's positive for cancer, they'll then do a more extensive lymph node dissection. And I think they're trying to do less than they used to do in the past because what happens when you take a lot of lymph nodes out, you can have problems and pathology secondary to that. The lymph nodes have a really important
They have a purpose.
Yeah. And So that is something that some women, and they'll sometimes say, "Oh, I had 14 out of 16 nodes positive."
Yeah.
So that's part of the staging of the cancer and helps determine the treatment. But if it's not metastasized, they'll have a negative lymph node, and you'll only have one or two taken. Although you can have issues even with just one or two lymph nodes taken out. Lymphedema is the thing that sometimes gets to.
That's when sometimes you'll see women with a lot of swelling on one side, especially in their arms and hands and things like that. So I did want to kind of touch on that because I realized we hadn't said anything about it.
Yeah,
I personally think that anybody who has breast surgery and any lymph nodes removed should have a consultation with a specialist who does lymphedema treatment, physical therapists usually. It's not standard, but partly based on my experience and partly based on my patients, you almost always get some kind of swelling or lymphedema-like symptoms. And just learning a few exercises and a few techniques and things like don't let anybody take blood out of that arm. Wear a lymphedema sleeve if you're going to do X, Y, and Z. And that's an area that we haven't been great with.
No, we're not well versed in that. I think that's a really good suggestion to what you don't know, you refer. And so, so that people can get the best care still.
Right. And there are some really good people in the area who do that work, which is nice.
Great.
So, Shoshana, how has surviving breast cancer changed your care as a provider?
I feel like I am much more compassionate and empathetic, and I never know whether it's just because I'm getting older and more experienced or because of the things that I've experienced in my life. I mean, when you have health issues, and everybody's had some kind of health issue, and you get good care, you realize how important that is and how, nourishing, and it makes a huge difference in a time in your life when you're not able to take care of yourself necessarily. So I do think I learned that, and I do feel like I have brought that to my practice. Sometimes it's a little hard because sometimes people are kind of whining, and you're like, dude, you have a benign cyst. It's nothing. Don't torture me.
Yeah.
But then you think
because I am most important in this equation.
I am important, and I've lost both of my boobs, so you got nothing to talk about.
Yeah.
So, but then, you think she's upset about something.
Yeah.
And it's about the fear, and that often is what it comes down to. So you can talk to them about their fear. A lot of women are really afraid that they're going to have breast cancer.
And that sends their anxiety levels
way high.
to the sky.
Which is probably not great for I think one of the other prevention things is stress reduction. If you can make that happen in your life. I do think that chronic stress is probably not great for lots of diseases, including cancers.
Well, that's kind of leads me to what does self-care? What are you doing for self-care?
What am I doing for self-care? Well, this is a very fascinating time to talk about that as we're in the middle of a pandemic.
Right.
But it's been a good time because I've had a lot of time to think about it. Meditation, which I'm trying to cultivate a daily practice. I'm not hitting every day, but I do a lot, and it makes a huge difference. Meditation gives me the ability to put a little bit of distance between my initial reaction and how I respond. And I need that because I can go right into a tailspin.
We could all use that.
Everybody probably.
Yeah.
Exercise, and again, that looks different for different people. For me right now, it's walking. I'm not ready to go back into a gym yet, although I'm not sure when that'll happen.
That they're opening, and we've been trying to coordinate a walk for probably a decade now. You and I.
Yes,
we have different days off. That's the problem.
Oh, those darn jobs.
Yeah, I know. Someday I want to be independently wealthy.
Oh,
I don't know. I think that's too late.
And for women, the other thing that's so hard, and I don't know how to tell people to do it, is learning to say no.
Yes, that is colossal.
Having a process.
Gets a clap.
Having a process for yourself where you're not just doing things because you have to, you should, it's expected, because those things, that feeling leads to stress.
Yeah.
So doing things because you want to, you're looking forward to taking a walk with your friend, that's a whole different thing.
As PR always says to me, stop being a palm tree. Sometimes you just got to stand straight and tall and
say no.
And say no. It's really the hardest thing.
Say no, thank you. And I've learned ways now all these years to say, because I was one of those yes people. And so I've learned that it's not going to work out. So I'm cushioning it, but I'm not doing it.
Right.
You got that?
Right. You don't have to be mean about it, but
Right.
And you can even. I'd love to get to a state where we can all just say, you know what, right now, I just can't do that.
Yeah.
Right.
That's not for me right now.
And it is.
It's hard to say that to your friends and family and colleagues, but sometimes you have to.
Yeah, I think that that's super important.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think that's about all we have time for.
Yeah, it's
We
been
could keep talking.
it's
I would
been
love to, but
it's been an awesome, stimulating, great conversation. I've learned things, which I always do on all of our podcasts. I hope we have taught some things to our listeners, and
yeah, that was awesome.
we're
So
grateful
thank you.
for your presence.
Thank you. This was really fun.
Anytime you want to come back and be an expert guest on something else.
And we're definitely going to get Dr. Fine on here. She would love it.
Yeah, and she's brilliant.
I was just going to
brilliant.
say she knows.
She's just so
I
brilliant.
think she actually knows everything. Emily, if you're listening, I think you know everything.
And she can just sort of put it in little acorns
That's
for you
right.
so quickly.
That's
I've
right.
watched her do that, so
Yeah.
it's fascinating. Anyways,
All right. Well, we would like to thank Baobab Tree Studios, Kenny Blackwell for our song, our friends, family, and all of you who make this podcast possible.
please be sure to subscribe on Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google Play, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at The Midwife Crisis Podcast, all one word, or email us at midwifecrisispodcast@gmail.com. We love your feedback and your comments, your criticisms, your concerns. Give it all to us, your questions,
That's right. So until next time, get to know your breasts.
and save the tetas. Don't be afraid to talk about them.
Bye.
Bye.
Midwife